Let's begin with the word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful for this morning and for the opportunity that we have once again to open your word together. We ask for your guidance, that your Holy Spirit can teach us, correct us, and give us a vision of Christ, that we can see things clearly. We pray for each one. For those studying on the internet, and even those studying on their own, who are searching for truth, we ask, Lord, that you can guide them. Be with us now. We pray this and ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, good morning, everyone. Now,
Good morning.
Heidi and I went over this last night. Well, it's on the whiteboard behind me, a little bit more detail, but not much different. We just kind of discussed it. And one of the things that comes to mind as I started looking over it again this morning, and in trying to make it really clear what I understand happening, is that we have this reform line that is the creation of the world, and we're including this as the first waymark within a three-step testing prophetic message. That is, from Genesis 1 to 3, we are seeing the proclamation of the everlasting gospel. That is, the creation day contains within it the template for a reform line. But in the creation of the world, the three-step testing prophetic message is tied up in those first three chapters. And it's just like when we take the first angel's message, fear God, give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come. Contained within that first angel's message is all three messages. This is something this movement has understood for a long time. And we then would have to say that this is a reform line in response to the darkness, the satanic darkness that exists prior to the creation of the world. So the world is created after Satan has fallen. And we know God knows the end from the beginning. So there was this discussion we had, and Heidi and I have been reading the story of redemption. We just started on it. We were given the book as a gift, so we've been reading it. And Stephen and I had this discussion regarding exactly when did Satan fall in connection with the creation of the world. And we all agree that Satan fell before the world was created, but that part of his fall was, I wouldn't say it's the catalyst, but it was in connection with the counsels that the Son was having with the Father regarding creating man, and that Satan wasn't brought into those counsels. But it has to be that God had foreseen what Satan was about. It's pretty difficult, because even reading the story of redemption, it's not really clear. And Ellen White is trying to describe heavenly things in earthly terms. So exactly how this came about, we can sort of fill in the missing pieces. But as far as just a simple idea, we know that God had planned to create man and to create the earth, and that Lucifer falls in this period of time, and that there's a war in heaven that goes on, and then the creation of the earth occurs. This seems to be correct. Are we agreed upon that?
I would say yes.
Okay, so there's one person who agrees.
Yes.
Um,
Aye.
Yeah. Okay. So now there is a statement in the book of Jude. Now it says here, verse 6, And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. Does anybody know what this is referring to, how we would understand this verse?
To me, it sounds like it's referring to the fallen
Yeah.
from heaven. And that chains of darkness is they're not privy to God's plan at this point, unless they read scriptures.
Okay.
And we also know that Satan is a person that does just that, but I'm not sure if he has a real good view of it.
Anybody else with thoughts on this verse?
I would say it's they left their first learnings and like their foundation. I don't know.
Okay. Well, it talks about their first estate here. It has to do with their. This is the fall. This is them being cast out of heaven, in my understanding. So if they're reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day, what is that referring to? To the angels that have fallen? Or is this what this is talking about? Could this be them being bound to the earth?
Potentially.
Chains of darkness would seem to be.
Yeah, and now we know that Satan's going to be bound to the earth for 1,000 years. So I don't know. It's just something I'm throwing into the mix of trying to understand.
Well, if you look at verse 5, he's talking about those who were destroyed crossing the desert, right, in the 40 years.
Yeah.
And then verse 7, he's talking about Sodom and Gomorrah and what happened.
Yeah.
So it looks like it's a judgment
Yeah, he's
kind
talking
of statement.
Yeah, so he's talking about judgments of Israel, city of Sodom and Gomorrah, and also the judgment of angels. So I don't know. It's just a thought that I wanted to see what people thought about that verse. Okay, so we have this fall. So we know that there's going to be the creation of the world, and the creation of man is going to occur after the fall of Lucifer, of Satan. So he's in heaven, and he's cast down to the earth. Exactly when, we don't know, and what that means. I mean, there could be that they're sort of reserved in this chains of judgment, even chains of darkness, prior to the creation of the world. So that is, we don't really understand these things. That's all I'm trying to say. But we do know that the earth is created after the fall. And so that means the creation of the earth, God says, let there be light, is a reform line. And it's the pattern of reform lines. But this would be, even though it's a reform line in and of itself, it would be the first angel's message. And then Adam and Eve are going to fall. So after the seventh day rest, it reiterates the creation of Adam and Eve, which we say is a symbol of church and state in its proper relationship. And that this typifies the Sunday law in its opposite way. Now, of course, when Adam and Eve sin, we do have a Sunday law. That is, we have church and state are in an improper relationship. That is, the woman tempts the man. And then when they sin, then we have the gospel promise. So this is the everlasting gospel. So we can see that this is the proclamation of the everlasting gospel. And it occurs at the beginning of this reform line for what we call the great controversy line. So we're kind of agreed on this, I would assume, that we all have this understanding. So we've agreed so far that that makes the most sense.
I would say until we have more light.
Yeah. And then we dealt with the progressive destruction of 4. So the progressive destruction of 4 happens after a reform line, and this program's not working for some reason. I have to close this. I was going to try to open up this PowerPoint, but it's not working, so I have to close it and see what happens. Oh, yeah. And so this progressive destruction of 4, the way that we laid it out was Cain and Abel's the first generation. They have a building, which is the city of Enoch. And that's what happens in the first generation after a reform line. So in the first of the progressive destruction of 4, either a building is destroyed or a building is built, or sometimes both. And then you have Lamech, which is the 70 times 7, which is a mocking or a rejection of, it's kind of a rebellion against God, because the way that I understand Lamech's, the descendant of Cain, when he asked for this curse to be 70 times 7, this is really mocking God, because Cain had a curse for anybody who would kill Cain. He had a mark upon him. And so to me, Lamech is just mocking that. He kills somebody and he says, well, and the idea is that it could have even been manslaughter. We're not certain. But he says then anybody who kills him should have 70 times 7 worse punishment. And then we have the sons of God and daughters of men, which we say is the third. And that's going to be that mixture of the godly and the ungodly that leads to the period of time of the evil thoughts. That is, the thoughts of their hearts were only evil continually. And that's in the time of Noah. And we have this first time prophecy. So that time prophecy ends in that 4th generation. And there we have a reform line. So that's what we had structured. And I don't know how many people have thought further about it since we looked at it. But is there any more thoughts on this? So when we zoom into these lines, what we're saying is that this whole line is the arrival of the first angel's message within this waymark. So it's zoomed in and it's expanded with the first 3 chapters. But then once we get to the story of Cain and Abel, we're in the progressive destruction of 4. And that's going to lead to this reform line of the flood. And we also know that there's this increase of knowledge. So we have a reform line overall, but even within this reform line, there comes a falling away between each of these waymarks. That is, there is a reform line there. So to me, it seems logical. And it's consistent with what we already understand in this movement. The problem with it is that it requires us to sort through all of these reform lines. So now when we look at the reform line of the flood, are we going to see the same pattern? That is there going to be a mini reform line followed by a bigger reform line, if you understand what I mean? So just like the first angel's message is a reform line, its arrival has a reform line attached to it, like we see in the creation of the world. But that's just the arrival of the first angel within that waymark that we call the arrival of the first angel's message, because we're including the story of Adam and Eve and their fall and the proclamation of the everlasting gospel as being contained within that. And that's all in response to this darkness on the cosmic line, the great controversy line. So to people, I mean, to me, this makes sense. But do we have any criticisms of it, or any weaknesses, or any problems?
I think on this, where you have sky,
Yeah,
you could add the dividing of waters on there.
yeah. So where I just have the sky, that's the creation of the sky, but this is the dividing of the waters.
Yeah,
Yeah, so the waters are divided. Okay.
then the land of waters were gathered. I put the gathered of waters on land.
Okay, so the waters are gathered. So we could say, well, seas and land divided. If that makes sense.
Yeah, well, that's what happened.
Yeah, yeah.
Since.
So we can see there's these divisions that occur here. Now, you know, the problem here is the cosmic line. We've created this cosmic line, and we can see clearly, I think, that we have a progressive destruction of 4, and that the flood must be the next major waymark. Now we're calling it the formalization of the message. So we know that in the creation of heaven and earth, this is in response to the rebellion that occurs in heaven. But now we're going to see the results of that rebellion worked out upon earth. Now, why is God having this happen? Why is he allowing this reform line, this what we call the cosmic line here on this chart, the great controversy reform line? Why is he having this played out in this manner? What is it we understand about this? Because God's dealings with men are ever the same.
It's showing us he's the Alpha and Omega.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now the angels themselves, can they be redeemed?
No.
No, they can't, right? Ellen White's quite clear on that. Now, why is that the case? Why is it that the angels can't receive redemption?
Well, there wasn't so many years, developing the wrong character. That character, it's got to the point of no return.
Yeah, they closed their probation, and they rebelled in light, right? So they had all of this light that there was no reason for rebellion. It's called the mystery of iniquity. Now, man is, Adam and Eve sinned, and yet they have redemption being offered to them. So what's the difference with Adam and Eve and the angels?
Well, it seems as though the angels were in proximity. Not only that, but you had said that they had closed their probation because of the statements that were made by the messenger. Long did they deal with Satan or with Lucifer.
Yeah, long, yeah. So Christ, yeah, they did have an opportunity of repentance.
That's my understanding.
Yeah. But
They
one,
passed that opportunity once they were thrown from heaven.
yeah. But there was no plan made for their redemption. That is, according to the spirit of prophecy in the story of redemption, that here I can probably find the statement. Because it's right at the beginning of the book. Yeah. Because he has these sympathizers she talks about. Satan's quite believes that they can't, that God would not forgive them. I'm trying to find the statement. Gonna have to find it. It's too much to read. Anyway, she says something to the effect that there is no plan made in regard to this, but I can't find it. So anyway, I'm gonna have to look up that statement later. So we have, anyway, this opportunity for man to be redeemed. Now, the purpose of this Adam and Eve's probation is to show that God is just. That is, in his condemnation of the angels that rebelled, humanity is now going to demonstrate that God was just in doing so, to the point that even Satan himself will recognize that God was just. Satan himself will bow and recognize this point, right? So that man is involved in this restoration of the universe is something that's quite remarkable. It's not well understood by other Christians. That is, they don't understand the purposes of mankind. They just sort of think it's an arbitrary act on God's part. But it's purposeful. And that's partly what we understand as Adventists with the great controversy theme. But it's something that we're going to have to keep in mind all along the way when we look at this reform line, because this reform line, like all reform lines, address a darkness. And so this increase of light that we have at the beginning doesn't just occur at the beginning, it's actually happening all the way through. So mankind is in ignorance. That is, they don't have the opportunities that the angels had. And each of us, when we're born ignorant, unaware of these issues of sin. It's something that we then experience in our life. So we experience as well a reform line, a personal reform line that has to do with the darkness of not knowing and understanding ourselves, God, or sin. And then God brings us through this reform line till we come to a close of probation. We make a choice. That close of probation can happen when we die, can happen while we're alive. So I just think that there is something that we really need to understand about these reform lines, that they're not just about events or waymarks in history, that they're actually showing or demonstrating how God is working, how he is revealing light. And when we understand the purposes of a reform line, then we can understand why the experience that we experience in a reform line, why it is the way it is. So the next waymark we have here is the flood. Now, it's a formalization of the message, which has to do with light, and light and darkness are truth and error. And we're going to see this manifested in this period of time in which sin is manifested for what it is. And then we have this reform line. And this is a pretty important reform line, and we're going to take time going through it. Now, in the story of the flood, and I'm going to go to one of these papers we looked at earlier. So it's Noah's reform line. And there was these reform lines. Where are they now? So it's the Book of Reform Lines. It's called, here, I'll share the screen. And this was made by Marco, so back in 2019. Now, in the reform line of Noah, we're going to see all these characteristics: a period of darkness, the time of the end, an increase of knowledge, formalization of the message, a heavenly being descends, the foundations being laid, the activity of the enemies, the second message, a glorious manifestation of God's power, and the third message, the door closes. That's the basic idea, with the number 7 at the end, and then this 40 days of rain that they talk about, which would represent could refer to the Holy Spirit being outpoured, the latter rain, something like that. Now, in this history then, so let me go back. We saw that this period of darkness is the fourth generation. That is, it's the fourth progression of rebellion. And God saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Now, of course, this book here is written for children, so it's got very simple language. So then what, if this is the period of darkness, what is the increase of light about? So you're going to have a time of the end, right? So that's going to be next. And the time of the end, okay, let's look at it specifically. What's the time of the end? Because I have problems with the way that they set out this reform line. So you got the time of the end. What do they mark?
Time of the end is normally the end of a time prophecy.
Right. So the time of the end is the end of the 120 years. Now, Methuselah, his name means, because moth means death, and so it's when he dies, he shall come, or it shall come, right? So this is talking about the flood. So Methuselah lives to the time, to the year that the flood is going to begin. Now, this is from Patriarchs and Prophets. It says, the sins that called for vengeance upon the antediluvian world exist today. The fear of God is banished from the hearts of men. His law is entreated with indifference and contempt. Whereas in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. God did not condemn the antediluvians for eating and drinking. He had given the fruits of the earth to supply their physical wants. Their sin consisted in taking these gifts without gratitude to the giver, indulging appetite without restraint. It was lawful to marry. He gave special directions concerning this ordinance, clothing it with sanctity and beauty. But marriage was perverted and made to minister to passion. So we know that Methuselah is going to die, and we know that the 120 years is the time prophecy. Here, they seem to be taking it as Methuselah is the time prophecy. Now, is that true?
I would say no.
Okay. Okay, why would you say no?
Because the time prophecy was given to Noah, not Methuselah.
Okay, well, could we argue that both are correct?
Yes.
Okay,
The time prophecy was more properly originally given to Enoch because that's the reason he named his son the way he did.
okay, right. So Enoch is the one who is attaching the lifespan of his son to this God judging, right? Now, of course, Enoch is marking the end with the coming of Christ. Correct? Right? So they're in this progression of this increase of light. Enoch has no real idea of when the world is going to end. Now, the world that's going to end based upon the age of Methuselah, or the lifespan of Methuselah, is going to be that antediluvian world. It's going to be destroyed by a flood. It's not going to be the second coming of Christ when the earth is destroyed by fire. But God isn't revealing everything all at once, because this is a reform line. It's an increase of light. What Enoch recognizes is that God is going to judge the world. And through inspiration, he names his son Methuselah. Would we agree with that?
That actually sounds very logical.
Okay. But we also know that Noah is given a time prophecy of 120 years. Now, is it understood that often we have two time prophecies that come together to mark the time of the end? Not saying always, but often.
Yeah.
Okay.
Two witnesses.
Yeah. So can we name some of these time prophecies that come to an end and mark the time of the end?
The 2300 days and the 2520.
Okay. Well, that doesn't really mark the time of the end, but it is two time prophecies. But what about 1798? Does it has to have two time prophecies?
You've got the 1260 that's part of the 2520 there and the 2520 itself.
And also the 1290.
Right.
Okay. So I guess you could argue maybe three if you wanted to put it there, right? So you have these witnesses. Now, something like the 70 years, they don't actually end at the same time, but we have 70 years for Babylon and 70 years in Babylon. And they are connected together with that time of the end dealing with the decrees. What about 1989?
You could put that in there.
Because we have the 126 years from 1863 to 1989. I don't know if we have another time prophecy, though we do have, in connection with that, we have the one that marks 2014. So there's something there, 151 years and 126 years. So we have a number of time prophecies. We also just have direct prophecies that were fulfilled. That is, we understood that there would be this repeat of history in 1989. We also have the 390 and the 40 years that ends in 587, that marks the beginning of the siege. Any other ones? I know there's something I'm forgetting.
The 490 and the 7 days or the 7 years of the life of Christ.
Okay, yeah, so the 490 years and then the final week.
Right.
Yeah. We can also see in 457 BC, there's really the 220 years and the 140 years from Jehoiachin, 140 years from Jehoiachin. So we have lots of time prophecies. Oh, and the 400 and the 430 that end with the Exodus.
Even the 490 and the 70, 607.
Yeah, so the 490 and the 70 to 607. That marks, well, Daniel's captivity. Though that's not marking a time of the end particularly, but it kind of is. There is a reform line in there in that progressive destruction of 4. So there's lots of these time prophecies, and so it's consistent, the idea that there is this 969 years and this 120 years. And now this is, where's the verse that says it's 120 years? I always forget where it is. Is it in chapter 6?
Yes.
6 verse 3.
6:3, okay. And the Lord said, "My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his day shall be 120 years." Now, of course, a lot of people just interpret that that's how long they're going to live, which is ridiculous because nobody lives till 120 years at that time. So this is marking a period of time, a period of probation that occurs in connection with this 4th generation.
Now, one of the things that has struck me in this conversation,
Yeah,
you brought up the age of Methuselah.
yeah,
Yet, if we look back a little further, what was the warning that was given to both Adam and Eve should they eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil?
Well, in the day that ye eat thereof, ye shall surely die.
Right.
Yeah,
Now, when we look at the age of Methuselah, he is almost a day old according to God's chronology
yeah,
when he dies.
yeah. Well, and I would say that everybody dies under 1,000 years,
Right.
right? So they all are going to die within a day.
But you have Adam dying at 930,
Mm-hmm.
70 years short of a day.
Yeah,
Methuselah dying at 969, which is 31 years short of a day.
mm-hmm.
And Noah dying at 950, which the 50 being a symbol of the Jubilee, right?
Yeah. So you have all these different symbols, 70, 31, 50, less than 1,000.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting point. So they know that that there's this limitation because of sin. So they must understand, at least prophetically, that they're in a period of probation because of sin. But now in the time of Noah, there's going to be this time prophecy of 120 years. So we know that the third generation, we're saying, is that the daughters of men, or the sons of God, saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. So there's this disregard of one is, Ellen White says, the sanctity of marriage, but also that the godly are mixing with the ungodly. And that leads to this time prophecy of 120 years. And it's during this period of 120 years that the imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually, in referring to man. And so then God says, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So we're going to have this story of Noah. Now, there's lots of details, and so we need to take our time going through this. We know that Shem, Ham, and Japheth are the sons of Noah. Now, who's the eldest?
Japheth.
So Japheth is the eldest. Now, Stephen, have you figured this out, basically, who the order of the birth of these?
I just have Japheth, Shem. I'm not too sure when Ham was born, but I would say he'd be the youngest.
Yeah, that's my understanding. And
That's what the scripture says.
Okay, the scriptures say that. Now, notice Shem is mentioned first. And this is an important point later on when we're dealing with Abraham and his brothers. Abram, when Terah has his 3 sons, is that the one who through the promised seed is going to come is going to be mentioned first. And that's going to be through Shem, not through Ham or Japheth. So it's just a little point there.
Does that have anything to do with when it was to the 12 for Jacob?
When are you
Jacob's
talking?
time?
Yeah, we're talking about the inheritance being passed on.
Correct.
Yeah, so there's a promised seed, the way it's supposed to work, and then how it actually works. So we have, let's just read on here. The earth was also corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt. For all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, The end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood, room shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. So this building of the ark is going to happen through a period of 120 years. Now we can, I guess, argue that it's going to be completed at the end of that 120 years. But this is not the beginning of the reform line. This is not the laying of the foundations of the reform line. Can't be the building of the ark. And which they do in that booklet. They try to make somehow, and I'm not really sure how they do that. So the giving of the message can't be the increase of knowledge in relationship to this reform line. That is, the reform line is going to begin at the time of the end, right? So that's the way we understand it. The reform line is the time of the end. So we can't call what Noah is doing, at least in my understanding, we can't have this period of time being the reform line itself. This is preparatory to the time of the end. Am I wrong there, or is there something wrong in my thinking? Because some people would say, well, we would mark Noah as being the preacher, and so he should be in this reform line, and then the time of the end would have to be in connection with Noah's preaching. So that's the argument that they're using in their booklet. So, so Noah builds this ark. We know that. So I would say the time of the end comes when the ark is finished. So the Lord said unto Noah, Come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean beast thou shalt take thee to thee by sevens, the male and his female, and of beasts that are not clean by two, the male and his female. Right, so this is going to be at the end of the 120 years that this is going to occur. Now, Jeff did a study on the gathering prophets and the proclaiming prophets. And what did he have Noah to be? Was he a gathering prophet or a proclaiming prophet?
I thought he was both.
Right, he's both, right? Maybe I can bring up this diagram. Okay, so I think he's both, or does he have? Oh no, he doesn't have them as both. Okay, so I thought he did. Well, at least this is the chart that I have. So you're going to have Enoch as the proclaiming prophet and Noah as the gathering prophet. Then you're going to have Abraham as the proclaiming prophet, Moses as the gathering prophet, Jeremiah as the proclaiming prophet, and Daniel as both proclaiming and gathering prophet, Nehemiah as a gathering prophet, John the Baptist as a gathering prophet, John as a gathering prophet. That's John the Revelator. Saul as a gathering prophet, and Ellen G. White as a gathering prophet. So whether this is correct or not, I would say here that I would have Noah as both a proclaiming and a gathering prophet, not just Enoch as a proclaiming prophet. And here they're going to have 5 dispensations: the Garden of Eden, the altars, the earthly sanctuary, the heavenly sanctuary. And what's the one on the side here?
I would think Nehemiah was a gathering prophet too.
Nehemiah is a gathering prophet. But, yeah, so they have Nehemiah as a gathering prophet. But see, I would have put Ezra as a gathering prophet.
Yeah, that would be.
So I don't know. This is just a chart. It's based upon what Jeff had been teaching regarding
Question.
time prophets. Yep.
So as I'm looking at the chart, you have the one Enoch with his arm raised up, and
Noah's got 2 arms. That means just that they're gathering.
okay, so that's the gathering. The other one would be proclaiming. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, proclaiming. But I would say Noah is a proclaiming prophet as well.
Yeah, I should have one arm up and one arm down.
Yeah, well, they have that with Daniel. He has actually 3 arms. But yeah, I would put Noah as both, because I believe that he's a proclaiming prophet as well as a gathering prophet.
He was definitely given a message, and he was definitely preaching that message in whatever form, whether it was just by the hammer and the saw or by the voice.
Yeah. Now this was created, this PDF was created in 2010. And again, it's Marco Barrios who made this chart. So he seems to see that Enoch is the proclaiming prophet based upon the age of Methuselah, and that Noah's the gathering prophet. And he doesn't seem to take into account the 120 years. So these are ideas. I mean, I know I'm familiar with these ideas. I'm not an expert on what was taught in that period of time because I wasn't really following the movement at that time. I've read and watched a few videos, but we know that there was the time prophets. I've watched that video. It's just a one presentation that Jeff did that's sort of related to that gathering and proclaiming prophets. But now Noah here is going to be told to bring the animals into the ark, and we're going to have another time prophecy. Genesis 7 verse 4. For yet 7 days I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. Now, there is this word yet 7 days. What is that referring to?
The 7 days that they were enclosed within the ark.
Okay. So what does it mean yet 7 days? What is implied by yet?
That the 120 years had not been completely fulfilled.
Okay. That's not my understanding. I mean, it's there. The 120 years has been fulfilled. I mean, I don't know if it's a day, the exact day when it's supposed to be fulfilled. But the idea is that there's going to be 2 periods of 7 days. So let's read on here. For yet 7 days I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. And Noah did according to all that the Lord commanded him. And Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters was upon the earth. And Noah went in, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him, into the ark because of the waters of the flood, of clean beasts and beasts that are not clean, and of fowls and everything that creepeth upon the earth. There went in 2 and 2 unto Noah into the ark, the male and the female, as God had commanded Noah. And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth. And in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, in the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. In the selfsame day entered Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them into the ark. They and every beast after his kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and every fowl after his kind, every bird of every sort. And they went in unto Noah into the ark, 2 and 2 of all flesh, wherein is the breath of life. And they that went in male and female of all flesh, as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. And the flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the water increased and bare up the ark, and it was lift up above the earth. So when we read this, what do we notice about this account and how it's written? I mean, if you're just reading it, what is the problem you run into? trying to figure it out.
Seems to be that repeat and enlarge.
Okay, it's the repeat and enlarge, which confuses us, right? Because it seems to be that they're going over the same thing, and it's hard to know the order. Now, I'm going to read what Ellen White says. This is from Spirit of Prophecy, Volume 1. She says the same thing other places. So I'll switch the screen here. The period of their probation was drawing near its close. Noah had faithfully followed the instructions God had given to him. The ark was finished, exactly as God had directed. He laid in store immense quantities of food for man and beast. And after this was accomplished, God commanded the faithful Noah, "Come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me." Angels were sent to collect from the forest and field the beast which God had created. Angels went before these animals, and they followed, 2 and 2, male and female, and clean beasts by sevens. These beasts, from the most ferocious down to the most gentle and harmless, peacefully and solemnly marched into the ark. The sky seemed clouded with birds of every description. They came flying to the ark, 2 and 2, male and female, and the clean birds by sevens. The world looked on with wonder, some with fear. But they had become so hardened by rebellion that this most signal manifestation of God's power had but a momentary influence upon them. For 7 days these animals were coming into the ark, and Noah was arranging them in the places prepared for them. So, how many days did it take for the animals to go into the ark?
7.
Okay, so it took 7 days. So this comes from where it says yet 7 days. That's the way that I've read it, that there's 7 days and a period of 7 days that they're in the ark with the door closed. And it's not easy to see when you read this, but that's how Ellen White understands it as well. Any questions on that?
No, but it does point out the precedence for repeating and enlarging.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, we see this all through the story of Genesis. There's lots of repeat and enlarge. Now, Noah's 600 years old, and it's going to say in 7:11, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, in the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. So when we look at this and we see the 17th day of the second month, when do we think that this flood occurred?
What do you think, February 17th, huh?
Okay, actually, I've seen people who think February 17th, to be honest. It's kind of
Straight off the bat. I mean,
but we would often think it's in the spring if we understand the biblical calendar. That is, we know that during the Exodus, God started to count the months for the first time. So the months were not counted, they weren't numbered prior to the Exodus. For instance, the Assyrians don't number the months. They just name them, right? They don't have, even though they have the king begin his reign in Nisan in the spring, they don't number the months. So the Babylonians didn't, the Assyrians didn't. They just name them. And same with the Jews. Now, they're not naming the month here, they're numbering it. So there are two different options. It is that we could say that Moses is going to retroactively go back and take the story of Genesis and attach to it the equivalent Hebrew month numbering. Now, when was the book of Genesis written?
It was near the end, I think, when Noah was in Midian,
Yes.
looking after the sheep.
So he's a shepherd. So this is prior to God numbering the months that Moses wrote this. Now, it could be, you know, a person could argue maybe an editor went back and changed this, but this wouldn't really make much sense. So the idea would be here is that when it talks about the second month, the way that people would have counted is in relationship to some event or some that is they didn't have a fixed calendar that numbered the months. But if you're going by what's that?
How did the Egyptians, sorry for the interruption, how
Okay.
did the Egyptians count months, or did they?
Well, they named months.
Okay.
So that is a good question. So when it comes to the Egyptian calendar, if I'm going to go here, I'll just show you here. So we'll go. I guess this is the easiest one to use because everything's just all there. So I'm going to go back to the year of the flood, which is going to be 2391. And when you look at, I have to go BC. Okay, there we go. No, that's gotta get to the Julian date. And here we're gonna have the Egyptian calendar right here. So here's the Egyptian calendar. This is the Julian calendar. And they do have the months numbered. That is, the Egyptians didn't number them, but they were numbered by other people, right? So we know that their first month is there, the second month is there. I don't know how to pronounce the Achet and Phaofi or Paofi. I don't know how you pronounce the Egyptian month names. But if we were to do this, we would see that it's roughly at that time lining up with the Hebrew months. But the Egyptian calendar keeps drifting because it's a 365-day year. They don't add the leap year. It's 12 months of 30 days each with 5 days at the end. So somebody could argue maybe that they were using the Egyptian calendar. I mean, that, I guess, is a possibility. And that's how often people look at it. So
Wasn't Moses Hebrew?
yeah, he's Hebrew, but he was also Egyptian. So the way that it's understood by Ussher, so James Ussher, the famous chronologist, he assumes that the calendar that's being used at the time of the flood is an Egyptian calendar. So that's just an assumption he makes. Now, that means that he believes that each of the months are 30 days each, and that it's a 365-day year. He doesn't assume a 360-day year. Now, some other people do. That is, they assume that before the flood, the year was 360 days long and the months were 30 days long. Now, I've worked out mathematically if it's possible to convert, that is, could the flood have caused a 365-day year with the 29.5-day month if we started with a 360-day year and a 30-day month? And I don't think it's possible. I'm not going to go into that explanation, but also this idealized year of 360 days and 30 days doesn't actually work. That is, when you think about it, it seems to work just on the surface, but when you look at how an orbits work, you have changes that occur. That is, the Earth's orbit is affected by the other planets. So you have these perturbations that occur. And so you can't really have a calendar that works like that based upon the moon and the sun. That you're going to have these, you could maybe have had an average year, but there's other complexities involved as well, which I'm not going to go into right now. But the point is, you asked the question. So we're going to take that the flood occurred in the year, and this is going to be, let me see here, because this is going to be in the spring, and I want to go back a few months. So where I have, or forward a few months. So I believe that the flood actually began in the fall, and it's going to begin in what, that the first month of Noah's 600th year is what we would now call the 6th month. And I don't know how much detail we should get into on this. We spent a lot of time as a Bible study group back in 2015 working this out, 2015 and 2016. And so I'm going to switch back. I'm going to switch over here. Oops. So here's my chronology of the flood as a line diagram. And what you see here is we're going to obviously have a first day of the first month. It's not mentioned in the story of Noah. And it's going to talk about 7 days that Ellen White makes clear is the time that it takes for the animals to come onto the ark. And then the door of the ark is going to be closed and everyone's going to be shut in for 7 days. And at the end of 7 days, there's going to be 40 days that it rains. Right? So if we can zoom in on that, we'll deal with the rest of this in a bit more detail. But it's kind of an interesting structure, as you can see here, that there's 40 days, 7 days, and 40 days, if you counted from the first day of the first month. Now, that first day of the first month, I'm argue, is actually the first day of the 6th month. And the way that we worked this out was rather complex. But what we did is we calculated when the flood would have occurred based upon biblical chronology. And that is, we had it, the year of the flood is 2390 BC. And then I looked at the calendar. That is, I had to take these spans of time that are given here in the scriptures in which things occur, and I had to fit them into a calendar that would work. And the only calendar that would work would be a solar lunar calendar where the full moon is marking the center of the month. So I'm not using a new moon sighting. We're using the full moon. Now, why would I do that? Why would I use the full moon to mark the center of the month and not the sighting of the first visible crescent in this period of history?
Possibly because of all the light is shining from it.
I don't know what you mean.
Well, full moon, you got all the light. Partial moon, you have a bit of the light.
Okay. So, yeah, I don't know if that's the reason. Well, one, I guess you could say is when it comes to the sighting of a new moon, prior to the flood, would that have been possible with the humidity that you would have had prior to the flood? That is, we know the atmosphere difference. So it wouldn't be a very reliable way of determining the beginning of a month, because you would have to go by the sighting of a new moon. And that's not as easy as you would think it is. Now, in the land of Israel, it usually works pretty well. but depending where you live and what kind of atmosphere you have, it could affect it quite a bit. That is, atmospheric conditions are going to be more of a problem. So if you're looking at the full moon, and especially prior to the flood, people's ability to calculate when the moon is going to be full or not full, when the month is going to exist, would be greater than our understanding. That is, the Jews had to depend upon the sighting of the first visible crescent because they couldn't have calculated the month. But the antediluvians were a lot more intelligent, and they would be able to know when the months occurred. So it's kind of a tenuous sort of argument that I make. That is, it's not something that I can prove, except that when we worked it out, we found that the dates that were given us had only one fit. There was a particular type of calendar. And it was a calendar that other people had suggested was used prior to the Israelites. And that is, you use the full moon to mark the middle of the month.
What calendar was that again?
It's just a theoretical calendar. That is, we know that some people in some places of the world, in determining the month, don't use the first visible crescent. They use the full moon as the middle of the month. And it's kind of hard to explain without going into detail, but the month varies in length. It's not, every month is not the same. The average month is 29.530,587 days, but that's just the average month. So to determine any particular month requires pretty complicated calculations. But in order to determine when the full moon is, you would have to actually know a lot more about the calendar than ancient peoples would have in the time of the Israelites when they left Egypt. But the antediluvians would have a better understanding of the month than even we would, because they're a lot more intelligent than we are. So they could probably just figure out exactly based on memory, perfect memory, and be able to do math in their head. They would be able to figure out the months. So the question is, these months, one is we can show they're not 30-day months, that they're months that are 29 and a half days. So this is something, we're going to have to work through it a little bit. But I think it's an important point in understanding this calendar and what happens. Now, so the Bible gives us 2 periods of 7 days, and especially that's seen in the spirit of prophecy. 7 days for the animals, 7 days waiting in the ark after the door is closed. And then the 17th day of the second month is not the second month in the spring, but it's the second month of the days of Noah's 600th year. Now, in order to figure out what Noah's 600th year started, I had to take the date that was given for the flood, and I had to match these spans of time that are given to us with a calendar. That is, I looked at every possible calendar that we could think of. We looked at an Egyptian calendar with 30-day months. We looked at the modern biblical calendar. But we looked at a calendar which is suggested based upon the Passover having to be after the full moon, so that the 14th of Nisan has to occur after a full moon. So it's kind of a complicated point. But when we worked out every single calendar, there was only one calendar that worked. And that's not what we would call the biblical calendar, though it's close to it. And the other thing is that it's a year of 385 days. So I don't know how much detail people want to work through on this, because it's a rather complicated problem. But it's something that helped confirm these dates and the year. And the other thing that became of interest is when we looked at the date based upon that calendar that the door of the ark was closed. According to the Julian calendar, that date is October 22. Because this, what we call the 10th day of the second month, is the day the door of the ark closes.
That's kind of amazing.
Yeah. And the thing is, I didn't notice it at first. So we're going to work through this. We're going to go through this and show why this is. But there are some assumptions that people have made regarding like the 220 days, etc., that I think people have made a mistake. Now, I could be wrong. I could be completely wrong about all of it. But I don't think I'm wrong because I worked through everything with every possible explanation that I could think of for these spans of time. So we didn't just start with an assumption and say, here's our conclusion and let's make something fit. We actually looked at every possibility. So it is kind of it's an interesting story of how we came to this conclusion. So we will go through that story during this week. We'll try to get this chronology of the flood understood.
Comment?
Okay, so now let's go back to Genesis. And we're going to just read some more here and then we'll discuss it a little bit. Now it talks about the self-same day. Okay, Stephen?
Yeah, I was just going to note that on the calendar converter, it says the 10th day of the 7th month is October 25.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, which version are you using? Are you using the first version or the second version? Now, the calendar converter is wrong.
Version 8. It says version 8.
Okay, version 8. Okay. So I'm going to go to 321. I'm just going to see, because I got, he came up with a new version of it, which is even worse than his first one.
So this is, 2991 BC. Is this right?
2391 BC.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I had the wrong date.
But yeah, even if I go to the calendar converter, though, it's not going to be correct because it's using a different way of calculating it. First off, is we're going to look at each month individually. So I'll just show you what I mean. So this is the calendar converter. This is the first version. And you can see 2391 BC. That's a Julian year. The Gregorian year would be 2390. And I have here October 21 is the 10th day of the 7th month. But in this case, what they're doing is they're going, they're counting the first day of the first month and that it's always 187 days to the 10th day of the 7th month. But that's not the case if you observe the month. Each month is observed. That wouldn't be the case. So we don't have until the Exodus that we have a fixed period of 30-29, 30-29, 30-29 for the first 6 months.
Right, okay.
So that's part of the problem there. But also I'm determining the month based upon the full moon as being the 14th. So it's a little bit more complicated than that, than just even, because I'm not using the new moon to determine the months. And that's because when we tried to use the new moon to determine the months, we couldn't find a fit. But when we use the full moon to determine the months, we could. And that's for all particular dates. So it took us a lot of time. It wasn't an easy task. And I don't think we can go through that whole process because it took us months to figure this out initially. Now, but that's a good point that you bring up. Now, this is the first calendar converter. He's got a new one which is the second calendar converter. So if I go to this one, 2391, and I go to October, you'll see it's even another day off. Well, this one actually works out. Because this one he's actually going to each month individually. So this one does work out. At least for this date. Right? Because he's counting each month individually, though he's doing it based upon the sighting of the visible crescent, which sometimes lines up and sometimes doesn't.
Refresh my memory. Sorry.
Yep.
Refresh my memory. What date are we looking at here? What was the event?
This is the closing of the door of the ark.
Closing of the door. Okay, thank you.
So we're saying it's on the 10th day of the 7th month, if it's in the fall, not the 10th day of the 2nd month, because it's the 10th day of the 2nd month of Noah's 600th year. So the question is, we don't know when Noah was born, what month. The Bible doesn't tell us. But what I did is I took all of the dates that are given, that is all of the spans of times and the dates that are given in the Bible, and I had to work them out so that they fit some calendar. So when you look at this here, and you're going to see this because we're going to go over this over the next few days, you can see I'm going to have when the raven is sent and when the dove is sent 3 times. The 40 days, the 120 days, all these different spans of time, the different dates, from the first day of the 10th month to the first day of the 1st month, where it talks about the 17th day of the 7th month, and that this is 150 days, is how people look at it, but it's not going to be. We're going to see how this works out. And then the 40 days, how long that span of time is, it's connected with the 150, so it's a period of 190 days, and why we worked it out that way. So we're going to try to at least give you a sense of what we were doing. And the point is that we recognized that there's 2 periods of 150 days, not 1 period of 150 days. And that the first period begins when the 40 days ends, and the last period ends on the first day of the 1st month of the next year, the 601st day of Noah's life. So in order to work it out, we came up with a different chronology than most people have. That is, this chronology is unique. I know of no other person who worked out the chronology of Noah's flood in this manner. So it was trial and error of trying to find something that fit, and this is the chronology that fit. Okay, so I know it seems rather opaque right now, but as we start to work through it, we'll start to see the logic of it. Now, this is just a chart of the spans of time. I've also created, what I had done is worked out the calendar so that I drew out every single day on a calendar. And let me see if I can find this here. I can even find out when I did this. Where are these calendars? I don't know where they are. Well, I guess if I just go here. So this is and I'll send you these papers as well, just so people can have them ready, or at least links to them. So this is going to be the chronology of the flood. And what I have is a calendar that works out. Where's this? Oh. This doesn't look like the right paper. That's an old paper. Never mind. Here it is. That wasn't the paper I was looking for. So we're going to have the story of the flood, and it's going to be a calendar that looks like this. So when you look at this calendar, you can see I have on the top, this is the 6th month, but it's also called the 1st month. So the bottom ones in the corner here, the ones where it says 1st, 2nd, 3rd, those are the months as given in the Bible in the years of Noah's life. And then these other ones, 6, 7, 8, you see there, those are going to be the months based upon the modern biblical calendar as far as how it numbers the months from the spring.
We're not seeing
I'm
that.
missing something.
You don't see
Yeah,
it, do you?
I'm not seeing it.
Okay, for some reason, how's that? There we go. I just
There it
thought
is.
I thought if I changed the file, it would automatically change. So you can see here, when we get to the 10th day of the 7th month, whether you can see that or not, I'm going to zoom in. Whoops. See the 10th day of the 7th month there? Tishri,
Yellow
October. It says October 22 is the 10th day of the 7th month. And this is the 2nd month in the 600th year of Noah's life. So the count at the top is the count of the moon month based on the moon. The bottom number there is the Julian date. And this is the 7 days here, the purple. This is the 7 days that the animals come into the ark. And then there's 7 days that they're in the ark after the door is closed. And then Ellen White's quite clear, it's on the 8th day. And also that it's a Sabbath. So that was the other thing. There was these Sabbaths that come into play. So when God closed the door of the ark, it was the 10th day of the 7th month. It was October 22nd on the Julian calendar, and it was a Sabbath. And then when the rains began to fall for 40 days, it's also going to begin on the 8th day. So after 7 days, on the 8th day then, the 17th day of the month, it's going to be a Sabbath. And then it begins to rain, and it rains for 40 days. And after 40 days, there's going to be a period of 150 days. That's the green, right? And at the period of 150 days, that's going to mark then a period that's going to begin another period of 150 days that's in. No, that's nothing to do with, I wonder what that's doing with. Anyway, I marked this 150 days. I marked the months, these different spans of time. It's kind of complicated, different months. But anyway, I have these days all marked. So everything is numbered out. All these different spans of time. I got all these numbers in these boxes, right? You see those numbers? So
What are those numbers in the boxes?
those are, so the top number is a Jewish month number day. The bottom one is a Gregorian month number day. And then these little numbers are the different spans of times that I'm counting. So I'm counting every day exactly. I'm not just.
Oh, I
so-
see. Okay.
How do you separate Julian from Gregorian?
Well, we don't use a Gregorian calendar in the past. So
You just named Gregorian on the first one. You didn't say Julian.
okay.
Or wait.
So when so Julian, I don't remember saying Gregorian. If I did,
No, you're right. You did say Julian.
yeah. So Julian, because we don't use the Gregorian calendar. I did mention it in that we had the Gregorian year is counted one. They use a 0 year on the Gregorian dates, and astronomers, it's very confusing how they do it. So you really shouldn't use Gregorian dates in the past, but some people do. Normally you're supposed to use, well, astronomers use the Julian day number.
So when do we start with the Gregorian? We use that at a certain point in history.
Yeah, 1582 AD, right? So that's, and for the American calendar, it's 1752 AD. The Americans changed to the Gregorian, and the British. So I know it's really confusing, all these different calendars, but
Oh,
what I did here with this is I worked it out in detail, day for day, all the different spans of time. So it wasn't just a sketch. It wasn't a guess. I had to work out everything in detail. So it took a lot of time.
Did you have help doing this? Maybe
Yeah.
from
Yeah,
Stephen?
we had a Bible study group in Warburg that was doing it.
Okay,
Yeah, I did most of the work, but
yeah,
we worked it out as a Bible study group together. So I would do a lot of the preliminary work, and then we would discuss all the problems and look at the different calendars. So I actually had made all these different calendars trying to fit these spans of time into those calendars. And this was the only calendar that worked. None of the other calendars worked. The Egyptian calendar didn't work. None of the calendars would work. And so people look at it superficially when they try to take the story of Noah and fit it into a calendar. And so because of that, they don't work out the details. They become misled in figuring out how that works. And the fact that this worked out perfectly for the Sabbaths was really kind of a remarkable aspect to it.
Sort of a seal of approval.
Yeah, and also while the October 22nd date was unexpected, and I actually didn't even notice it when I'd first made the calendar. That is, I wasn't thinking about it until I did the first time I presented it publicly, and I put it up on the screen, and then I noticed that it was October 22 that the door of the ark was closed. So I hadn't noticed that before.
yeah, that just got my attention.
Yeah. So it was kind of like, well, that's really a coincidence, because we weren't trying to do that. I wasn't trying to get it to be October 22. I had found that it was the 10th day of the 7th month, but I hadn't looked at the Julian date. I hadn't thought about the Julian date, oddly, until I presented it. Okay,
Well,
so
as we know, there is no coincidence.
yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of things like that I was kind of suspect of my own thinking. That is, how could I possibly have worked something out that's correct, that other people hadn't seen before? And then when I would have these types of coincidences, the same thing with 1533 BC for the Exodus. I really hummed and hawed about it for a long time, because no one else really was doing it except one guy also came up with the same date, and for the same reasons. But it's still, I questioned it until Stephen found the 1533 days between the first day of the first month and the 10th day of the 7th month. And then that for me kind of confirmed it. So so I know this is going to be a bit of work, and we went a bit over time as well. But
I don't think anybody has probably done it quite like this. I mean, it would take a very long time for Usher to have done the 30 days and the 30 days and the 30 days. It sounds to me like he did it more with math.
well, he just assumed that the 150 days from the 17th day of the first month to the 27th day or the 17th day of the 7th month, right? He assumed that would be a 150-day count if the months were 30 days long. But when you work out the whole count of how they're counting, they're not counting cardinal counts. They're counting ordinal counts. So and he's assuming a 30-day month. The 30-day month would actually be 151 days from the 17th day of the second month to the 17th day of the seventh month. Like if you take the biblical dates, it'd be 151 days,
Yes,
not 150, because you're going to be counting the first day as the first day, not as the 0th day. Right. So that was part of the problem, is that, and many people just made that same assumption. But then when you try to deal with all the other spans of times and the other dates, and you try to set this in a weekly calendar where you have a 7-day week and everything to work out, it doesn't work out. So that's what we found, because we actually did exactly the same thing for a 30-day month and a 360-day calendar, and we couldn't get the dates to fit. But you would only know that if you tried to work it out very specifically.
So this is kind of almost like the Jubilee again, 49, and then the 50th is actually the first.
Well, you mean in the ordinal count?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. But it's just ordinal. You're just counting the first day. So when it says it's 150 days, that's what we would call inclusive reckoning. That is, you're counting the first day as part of the 150 days. You're not counting the first day as 0. And it's just when we tried to work it out, it didn't work out. That is, we couldn't get the spans of time to fit. We couldn't get the dates to fit. And it just made no sense that they use a 30-day month. But we didn't care about that. We just tried to make it work, and it wouldn't work. So the months are going to be 30 or 29 days, because it's going to be based upon the moon. And so that was, I mean, it was a lot of work, but once it sort of fell into place, then it confirmed to us the year of the flood, because the year of the flood placed certain dates on a Sabbath, which made the most logical sense. That is, the day that they're going to let out the doves are going to be on the first day of the week. They're not going to let them out. So they're going to let out the raven and the dove and the dove and the dove. It's going to be on the first day of the week that they do that, not on some arbitrary day of the week. And that makes sense. And the period of 7 days then starts with the day that they're going to let it out another 7 days, another 7 days, another 7 days. And that's going to be 3 whole weeks. They're going to let out the raven and then the dove 3 times in a row, all on the first day of the week, if this chronology is correct. So that's the thing that kind of becomes, there just becomes too many coincidences to ignore it, is all I'm saying. But we're gonna look at this. So we're gonna try to see it not in as much detail, but at least a little bit, and understand the significance of also the reform line. But the chronology is part of that. To understand this reform line, we need to understand the chronology of the flood and what this year of the flood means prophetically. So sorry for going over time, but let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for the time we had to study here this morning. We ask that you can bring us together again each morning to study your word. Thank you for hearing our prayer. Be with each person throughout this day. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.